If you've ever drafted a Devy player thinking they're going to be the next superstar, only to watch them completely fall off the map, you are not alone. And the worst part is, most of these mistakes are avoidable. I've seen teams lose years of progress just because of a few bad Devy decisions. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 of the biggest draft mistakes that completely destroy dynasty teams and how you can avoid them so that you do not make the same ones. Before we jump into the mistakes, it is important to understand why Devy is so different. In normal dynasty leagues, you are drafting players who are already in the NFL or about ready to enter it. In Devy leagues, you are drafting players years before they even declare for the NFL draft. That means there is more upside, but also more risk. If you are not adjusting your strategy to account for that risk, you can easily set yourself back 2, maybe even 3 dynasty years. The first mistake is drafting too many freshmen. Mistake number 1, too many freshmen. This is probably the most common mistake, especially for newer Devy players. Everyone loves the shiny new 5-star recruit, and if we're being honest, everyone wants to be the manager who is first in on the next big prospect. There is a certain pride that comes without saying you had the player before anyone else even knew their name. But this is where things can go wrong. Freshmen are the most volatile assets in all of Devy. These players have not taken a single college snap yet. They can get buried in the depth chart, they could transfer, or they can simply not develop the same way that people expect them to. When you stack your roster with too many freshmen, you are taking on massive amount of uncertainty all at one time, and that can set your team back if those players do not hit. Now, there's an important layer to this, especially as your Devy league gets deeper. As leagues move into year 2 and beyond, the player pool naturally becomes more depleted. At that point, it can actually make sense to take freshmen because you would rather have the top prospect from a new class than like the 80th or 90th overall player from an older class who has limited upside. That is a completely valid approach. However, the key is understanding how to balance your portfolio of players across different classes and timelines. You do not want your entire roster tied up in players who are 3 or 4 years away from contributing. A better approach is to mix in elite freshmen with proven college producers and players who are actually closer to entering the NFL. Upside wins you leagues, but only if the player actually gets on the field and produces. And once you start evaluating these players, that leads directly into the second mistake. The second mistake is ignoring context, specifically conference, team situation, offensive system, and key production signals. One of the biggest traps in Devy is evaluating players in a vacuum. It's easy to look at a stat line or recruiting profile and assume the player is elite without asking deeper questions about how those numbers were produced. Not all production is created equally. A player dominating the Sun Belt is not facing the same level of competition as a player producing in the SEC or the Big Ten. That does not mean that a smaller school cannot be good. It just doesn't mean that you have to evaluate the production the same. The same thing applies to offensive systems. Quarterbacks and air raid systems often put up massive numbers, but that does not always translate clearly to the NFL. Meanwhile, players in pro-style or West Coast systems are being asked to do things that more closely mirror what they might be asked to do at the next level. This context can matter. You also have to pay attention to early production signals. If a highly ranked player, even a 5-star player, comes in and does nothing in year 1, that is information. It does not mean they are a bust. It just means you have to adjust your expectation. Once a player gets to college, what they actually do matters far more than what they were ranked coming out of high school. Production, health, usage, and even transfer decisions all give you real insight into a player's trajectory. And when you are gathering that information, it brings us to the next mistake. The third mistake is relying on just one source for all of your rankings. That is something almost every player does at some point. You find one site you trust, and you start treating that like it's the final answer. Those rankings are useful, but they should never be just your only source of information. Every ranking system has its own biases, and if you're only looking at one list, you're only seeing one part of the picture. If your entire draft board looks exactly like one website, you're not gaining any edge on your league. That is where you want to bring in multiple perspectives. You can look at your rankings from Devy Royale, Destination Devy, Fantasy Pros, NFL Big Board, and ESPN. Each of these offers a slightly different lens. And of course, unless it's Devy Bros, then you can't just completely trust one source completely. In all seriousness, the goal is to not just find a perfect ranking, the goal is to understand where different sources agree and where they can differ. That is where you start to find value. The best Devy managers are not just following rankings, they are building their own rankings over time. And once you have your own evaluations, you still have to apply them correctly, which leads into the fourth mistake. Mistake is ignoring your league settings and how they impact player value. A lot of managers walk into a Devy draft with one generic ranking list and just start selecting players. The problem is that not all leagues are built the same, and your rankings should not be either. Format matters. Superflex leagues increase the value of quarterbacks. Tight end premium leagues boost elite tight ends. Larger starting lineups make more depth important, but it's going even deeper than that. Specific settings like return yards can create hidden value for certain players. Keeper rules can influence how aggressive you should be with your younger prospects. Trade rules can determine how much risk you can actually afford to take. Taxi squad settings can change how willing you should be to stash long-term players. All of these details should shape how you approach your draft. This is also where tiered rankings become incredibly important. When you group players into tiers of similar value, your league settings become a tiebreaker. When you are on the clock, instead of guessing between two players, you can make a clear strategic decision based on your league format. At the end of the day, you're not just drafting the best players, you're drafting the players who can give you the biggest advantage in your specific league. And finally, all of this leads to the biggest mistake of them all. The final mistake is expecting too much from your Devy players. And this one is a little tough to hear because the reason we play Devy is for the dream. We want to find the next superstar before anyone else. We want all of our players to hit, and we want to build a perfect roster. But the reality is that almost never happens. Most Devy players are going to miss or bust. Only a small percentage become real dynasty assets, and even fewer turn into true difference makers. As managers, we naturally lean toward optimism. We see the upside and the ceiling, and we convince ourselves that our players are going to be the ones who hit. But sometimes the smartest move you can make is cashing out. I have seen this in my own leagues. I have seen DJ Lagway traded for Luther Burden. I've seen Nicholas Singleton traded for T. Higgins, and that deal happened 2 full seasons ago. Not only is Singleton now trending toward a disappointing outcome, but that manager got 2 full years of production from T. Higgins and still holds a valuable, tradable asset today. That's the difference. Proven NFL players hold value. Devy players are far more fragile. If you wait too long and your player's value drops, you may never get that opportunity back. Understanding this early can save your team from being set back multiple seasons. There's nothing wrong with taking small wins. In fact, that is often how strong dynasty teams are built. Those small value gains give you flexibility. They allow you to pivot, to trade, and to build your roster in multiple ways. At the end of the day, Devy is not about being right on every player, it's about managing value over time. And sometimes the best move you can make is taking the profit before everyone else realizes it's too late to sell. If you can avoid these 5 mistakes, you are already ahead of most of your league. If you have found this video helpful, make sure you drop a like and a comment of what your biggest Devy mistake you have seen or have made so far. If you want to build a dynasty league that actually lasts, make sure that you subscribe because we are just getting started here at Devy Bros. Thanks for watching.